Because as of yesterday, the United Kingdom has formally left the European institutions. That we're in a transition period, but the ultimate destination is that the UK will carve itself out a different path, not as part of a club of 28 countries together. Now, what does that mean for us? What comes next for us? The reality is that Brexit is not a finished deal. There is now a treaty that has to be negotiated about our relationship to the European Union. And that relationship is obviously going to be one based fundamentally around trade. Because the European Union doesn't have a concept of a common European culture. And it doesn't have a concept of a common European culture because the European Union was built upon a rejection of Europe's Christian identity, which is the only thing that Europeans actually have in common. We don't have ethnos in common, we don't have language in common, we don't have economy in common, we don't have forms of government in common. The only thing we ever had in common was our religion, and the EU tried to establish itself without the idea of a Christian identity. Now, the mantra of the Brexiteers was, we want our country back. And what they mean by that is that we wanted our sovereignty back.
Tell Boris that the landlord is now physically on the air. The landlord is on the air now.
To put your posters
Tell Boris.
Uncle.
Tell President Trump that the landlord is here.
Okay. One of the brighter characters at Speaker's Corner. So, one of the brighter luminaries giving a lot of colour to what it is to come to Speaker's Corner. So in terms of what happens next, now that we have claimed sovereignty back, the next challenge that this movement that has grown out of the Brexit campaign faces is to defend the Union. Because the next major threat to the idea of the United Kingdom is a resurgent civic nationalism in Northern Ireland and Scotland. So if you are part of the Brexit movement, if you are part of that movement that is busy smashing up the structures of our establishment, you now need to get behind the idea of unionism. There needs now a new party to form in Scotland, the Unionist Party of Scotland. The Conservatives, Labour and Liberal Democrats who are for the Union need to form a Unionist Party. And that's the next big challenge for this movement of people that are trying to reform what it lives to be within the United Kingdom. That's the next big challenge. But the challenge that comes next after that is that now we have our country back, we need to reclaim our culture. Because the reality is, 70 years of liberal progressive thought has washed away the historical identity of the people of this island. They have washed away its traditions. If I said Whitsunday to you, how many of you would know what I mean? If I said Pentecost to you, how many would know what I mean? We have lost our traditions and our sense of ourselves because liberal progressive thought has washed away our identity and has sought to reform that identity not upon our Christian culture and traditions, but upon a civic identity that has no connection to historical culture at all, that is based purely upon the idea of attachment to civic institutions like the army, the armed forces, the NHS, the parliament, democracy. And the ideas of John Locke and the rights of man. These ideas were a rupture within the cultural continuum of Europe. They were a rupture that broke us away from the organic evolution of our culture. They were revolutionary precisely because they disconnected the idea of culture from the idea of law and sought to recast laws apart from culture and to reform culture on the basis of law. Now that we have regained our sovereignty, we have the opportunity to regain our culture. Now, for sure, that presents us with difficulties, and I'm going to outline the chief amongst those difficulties. Over the last 60 years, maybe a bit longer, the British government has been following a socio-political doctrine called multiculturalism. Multiculturalism is based upon the idea that there is no absolute truth, there is no real right and wrong, that there is only a perspective, and that within that perspective, different groups have the right to live out their culture according to their own traditions. This plurality of cultures, this model of multiculturalism, is clearly failing. It is failing because we see that those cultures do not, cannot, and will not live side by side. The great sharing of the Irish stew of cultures has not occurred. We have not been enriched by ideas from Islam, and the Muslim community have not been enriched by the ideas of Christianity. However, as Christians, we believe in a form of multiculturalism that is based upon a cohesive tradition of values and beliefs that can express itself variably by different ethnos, by different groups of people together. We have seen the failure of multiculturalism in places like Rotherham, in places like Hull, in the cities of the north, where communities live separate lives in parallel, and where English communities who have been denied any sense of their own identity historically have been told that they must make space for other cultures, for the Islamic culture. And you see the frustration that emerges from that is constantly being sought to be capitalized on by ethno-nationalists who seek to stir up division along lines of ethnicity. Christianity, a muscular, robust church that is comfortable with conflict, able to stand upon its own values and doctrines and beliefs, and demand space for itself to follow those beliefs and those values without hindrance or incumbence from the state, can offer a vision of society that moves radically different from the idea of liberal, progressive, secular ideology. We do not need Sharia law in the UK. We are not enriched by Sharia law. We are not enriched by the failure of liberal pluralism, and it is time that our people rejected those ideas, root and branch, and returned to a form of traditionalism rooted in Christian paradigms and meta-narratives.
Perfect.
And that is where we need to go as a culture. That means that the church must offer a vision for society that is in contrast to and different from that offered by liberal pluralists who turn a blind eye to the persecution suffered by Christian minorities across the Islamic world, who turn a blind eye to the persecution of Christians by Muslims in the UK.
Yes, that's right.